project, I'm going to make an electric guitar that's specifically designed to play Indian classical music. We've drawn inspiration from traditional Indian instruments and what I've learned over the last 10 years of studying this music. This is something that's so very close to my heart, and I just can't wait to show you what I've been dreaming of making into a reality, and how we can keep developing the guitar as an instrument.
Let's take a quick look at the sitar and the aspects of it that we'd like to incorporate into the electric guitar design. So first of all, the sympathetic strings. Now these are a separate set of strings and they're tuned to the scale that you're playing. So they've got their own tuning pegs here and they go underneath the frets on the sitar. So you change it depending on what scale you're playing. So it means that anytime I play a note, then there's another string which is resonating just after me playing it. So there's the main string, you can hear that resonating. But if I silence the sympathetic strings and play that note at the same time, which is quite difficult to do because there's so many of them, then that's the sound of that single string on its own. And then here it is with all of them again. So it gives so much more texture. And especially if you play a low note, you can hear an octave above that because the sympathetics are tuned to the upper octave of the instrument. So that middle octave has the higher octave on top of it, so it really textures the sound and it's an intrinsic part of the sound of Indian music, this aspect of sympathetic strings. The other aspect of the sitar we'd like to borrow from are the Chikari strings. Now these strings they're situated just above the main playing string. So imagine I'm playing a melody and in between those notes I can have a different rhythm going on with the Chikari. You can also just use it to fill little blank spaces like so essentially this is a separate sound source within the instrument. It sounds so different to the fretted notes that it essentially makes the instrument more multi-dimensional, so there's different textures and different tones of string that are being produced, making an overall colour and overall landscape of the instrument. So just to give you an idea of how Chikari strings could sound, I've just replaced the low two strings on my guitar with top E strings. So this isn't quite how we're going to do it on the guitar that we're having built, but I can just give you an idea of how it can sound and what it's adding. So it means that I can just play those strings and then I can solo or improvise on top. So I can keep that tonal center going, and then because those strings are higher pitched, they're not taking up too much space. But they also can be used in a very rhythmic way, so you can start to play things like Okay, so let me quickly show you the key features that we've incorporated and how they fit onto the guitar. So we've got the sympathetic strings going across here. So as you play notes on the guitar, these strings are tuned to the notes of the scale that you're using, so they will start to resonate in response to what you're doing here. And we have special tuners here which you reach from the back of the guitar, and then the through-bodied strings here, there's a cover, so they don't get muted as your arm's coming across here. You won't mute the strings by mistake. We've got custom pickups that are wound and made to the exact right dimensions, so they're doing the job that needs to be done. And then we have the Chikari strings here. They're actually going through the body at this end, and then tuners down at this end, so they don't get in the way of each other. And they've got another little cover here, so small custom-made pickups are under this cover. And then we have the main playing strings, slightly different arrangement of pickups, and all through bodied strings, so the resonance will transfer to the sympathetics more vibrantly. And then with the controls, we have dedicated controls for the sympathetics and for the Chikaris, so volume and tone. And we also have pickup selectors for each set of strings. So you've got 2 pickups to choose from with the sympathetics, and there's 2 pickups underneath there for the Chikaris. So you can blend them and get the right kind of tone or right kind of response. And we've also got 3 different outputs. So these little switches here are line selectors. So you can choose if you want everything going through one output, or if you want to send everything out through 3 different outputs. So that means that you could have one sound with the main strings, and you might set up the other groups of strings with different effects or different tones, so you can really control every dimension of the instrument and get an overall soundscape that's tailored to exactly what you need to do. It's all built so none of this actually gets in the way of how you play, and you've got the regular controls here. So any guitar player could just pick it up and it'll feel familiar, but then there'll be all of these extra things that you can learn to incorporate.
In terms of bending on the guitar and trying to use the sitar method of bending, you tend to bend the strings downwards rather than upwards. When you bend the string upwards, then that's more traditional. That's the way that you tend to bend when you're doing blues, and it's hard to get away from that kind of feel bending upwards. But there's something about bending downwards which brings you closer to the sitar aesthetic, and just the physicality of it is very different. The other thing about using this technique is that you essentially have more strength inherent in your fingers, because as you're bending up, you have to sort of stretch the finger, and you can actually feel the lower part of your finger hitting against the fretboard underneath, hitting against the neck. So there's a limit to how far you can really go with that. If you're bending downwards, then you're actually closing the fingers, and when you do that, it's like you're making a fist almost. You can have so much more strength through doing that as opposed to sort of this. So as you bend down, you can get very comfortably to a high note, and that doesn't feel like much work. I feel like I can quite happily keep my hand there and then slowly release it to the next note and the next note again, and then it's easier to move into another bend with a different finger. What we'd like to do is make the guitar neck a bit wider at the bottom end. So if I bend as far as I can, then I basically just fall off the side of the board. And if that board was just a little bit wider, then it shouldn't really get in the way. It shouldn't feel like it's stopping you from playing across the fretboard, across the strings. But it will just enable you to travel the string a little bit further and get up to a fourth. So that means that we'll be able to transfer a great deal of the sitar bending type of phrases.
Something about this project which really excites me is that the guitar has its own character. The guitar is a very unique instrument, and there's certain musical lines and technical passages which really come to life specifically on the guitar neck and the way that you work with the plectrum. So if we can design a guitar which tonally blends well, so the sound quality of the instrument blends well with other Indian instruments, I believe there's certain phrases and nuances, certain musical lines that can come out of the guitar which could actually influence the way that you would look at a rag and even bring a slightly new kind of melodic shape into the way that you could play Indian classical music. Because you're using different strings and the way that you can very easily move large distances, it's something that only the guitar really brings. So I'm very interested to see how I can keep developing the guitar's voice and expanding it into Indian classical music in this way. Something that's very special about the guitar is that you can combine slides and you can combine bends. If you look at the sarod, for example, which is a fretless instrument, you do lots of sliding. Whereas with the sitar, you tend to bend the strings to do ornamentations. Whereas with the guitar, you can combine the motions of sliding and bending into a single phrase and create a slightly different overall ornamentation. So in this way, we can bring the guitar technique into the language of Indian classical music and see what it has to offer. But at the same time, it can be a two-way street, because if it's a Western instrument in its essence, it means that we can still use this adapted guitar to play Western music. We can still play chords on it and play the kind of runs that you would do in perhaps jazz or rock. But tonally, we'll have the whole environment of Indian music and that whole soundscape going on with the instrument. So it'll work very well to actually bring the Indian classical sound into a Western setting. So there's a two-way process that can happen with this guitar. It can go in both directions. If you'd like to help out and contribute to this project, then as a thank you, you can download a free copy of my solo album, which was recorded mostly in Portugal, and it's mostly using the classical guitar, but it has lots of influence of Indian music. And I'll also be hosting some webinars on Skype, so people can ask questions about adapting Indian music to the guitar, and we can go more into depth if that's something that you're interested in as a musician. So thanks very much for watching this, and I look forward to being able to show you the guitar when it's all done.